Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States, and in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from The Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. I'm Ryan Clark, joined today by Chris Reifer. As always, a beautiful spring day here in the Pacific Northwest. Not too hot. This is your weather made in Portland right out of the gate.
It's outstanding.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah. And
yesterday was even better. Getting out into the city yesterday, I had an opportunity to thoroughly enjoy the mid 70s, which is anything in that range. That's what you want.
Great
right?
stuff.
Yeah.
No complaints. 10 out of 10. No notes on the weather right now. I'm usually pretty great at complaining about it. Right now, no, I got nothing to say.
It's an inherent trait in
I am not a critic of the weather at this moment.
Good. You know what I think you might be a critic of is a performance by a certain soccer team in the city of Portland over the weekend. We'll begin there, actually, Chris. The Portland Timbers lost 1-0 to Minnesota United, giving up a goal in stoppage time at the death, as they say. After a pretty mediocre performance, something that even if it did end up being a draw, they would not have been happy with. And then they lost. And so their turnaround, quote unquote, came to what can only really be described as a screeching halt with that loss. You had talked before about them turning a corner right into a brick wall. Then it seemed like the wall might not be made of brick after all. They might be able to, get through it. Then it turned out, yes, it was made of brick, and they turned around and their noses were bloodied from running into it. Your takeaways, your feelings after that Timbers match, which could potentially be the turning point for the worse of the season.
I think it's worth sort of zooming out and looking at this stretch of 4 games as a whole, because as we talked about leading into it, this was going to be an important stretch, right? It was a real opportunity, maybe the best opportunity for the Timbers to kind of put their very early season struggles behind them and to sort of, get into a better footing in the table, get into a better stead heading into a month of June that's going to be a bit more complicated in terms of the opponents that they're going to face. So they had Austin at home. Austin's really been struggling, especially been starved for goals, but really struggling over this first part of the season. They had Vancouver at home. I'm taking this somewhat out of order. Vancouver at home. Vancouver has been a little bit better, but still not great. They had RSL away. RSL's really been struggling to score goals. And then they had Minnesota at home. Minnesota, stop me if you've heard this before, really struggling to score goals. 12 goals on the season coming in, and was also missing as they're probably 2 best playmakers. Babella Reynoso, who's been out all year, just getting back into the team after an extended absence / suspension / mystery, where he did not report to the camp. He has now reported, but still working his way back into fitness, and it looks like that's going to be a process. By far their best player. Nope, no questions about that. And then Robin Lod, who is I think probably the second most creative player in the attack, plays as a winger, leads the team in assists this year, albeit with 2, which gives you a sense of how that's been going from the Loon side. And he was also out, and so it was not a good Loons attack to start with, and it was substantially weakened coming into this Timbers. This game against the Timbers. Like the Timbers, Minnesota also played midweek, and so lots of heavy legs on both sides and all of that. And so I think if you look at that 4-game stretch as a whole, you would say that's an area, and that's just a period in which the Timbers have got to rack up some points, got to rack up some wins in there, because you got 3 home games. All 4 games are against mediocre to bad teams, and even the road game is very, very accessible. And they came out with 5 points from those 4 games. That's 1.25 points per game in that stretch. I mean, 1.25 points per game isn't going to get the job done in basically any stretch. It's especially not going to get the job done in a stretch like that. And it's especially not going to get the job done in a stretch like that when you preceded that stretch with 2 months of shoot. And so here we are now, 14 games into the season. The Timbers have 16 points. They've had periods in which the schedule's been challenging, difficult opponents. They've had periods in which the schedule has been not challenging, not difficult opponents. And they have similarly struggled through all of those periods. I mean, the Timbers just are their record. That's it. This is a team that is on 1.14 points per game because it's a team that deserves to be on 1.14 points per game. Like, there's not a whole lot else to say about that. And I think Gio Savarese probably in a little bit of an emotional moment after the game made some comments, decrying the critics and that kind of thing. Well, I think he kind of walked those back, frankly. He didn't expressly walk them back midweek, but I think he probably acknowledged a little bit more of the reality of the situation in his availability after training on Tuesday. I get it. After games like that, like if I was the coach of the team, I would have been emotional too. So I get it. But I mean, the reason people are critical of the Timbers is because they're 14 games into the season and they're on 1.14 points per game. That's bad. They're a bad team right now. Like, that's just it. And the only thing we kind of see folks cling to is this notion, this at least partially mythologized notion that the Timbers are always bad in this time of year and that they always turn it around. It's just kind of also not really true. It's not really factual. Like that happened in 2021, right? That was the one time. That's the outlier. But in the Timbers' 12 preceding seasons in MLS, 7 times they've gotten to this stage of the season, actually 15 games in. So it would be after this weekend, under 1.3 points per game. And so they've been under 1.3 points per game 7 times. They've been over it 5 times. Which, if you want to say, hey, wow, Timbers frequently start slow, you're right, they do. Of the 7 times that they've reached this point under 1.3 points per game, they've missed the playoff 5 times. One of the times they made the playoffs, it was 2019. They got in by the skin of their teeth and then did absolutely nothing. And it was a bit of a shambolical season. It was the Brian Fernandez season, all of that stuff where they started really slow. They caught a bit of a Mario star, if you will, in the middle of the season when Fernandez came in and initially was very good, but that situation obviously went pear-shaped. And by the end of the season, they were very much limping into what was a merciful first round exit. And then there's 2021. That's the one exception. Of the 5 times that they've gotten to this point over 1.3 points per game, they've finished atop the Western Conference in the regular season twice. They've won MLS Cup. They've been to another MLS Cup, and they won MLS's back. Basically, they have done shoot. Each of those 5 seasons goes on the resume. They've done something that goes on the resume in each of those 5 seasons. In the 7 seasons where they get to this point under 1.3 points per game, they have only once done anything that goes on the resume, and the other 6, frankly, go in the litter bin. So, like, the idea that the Timbers always do that, but they always end up fine in the end just isn't true. Like, when they start slow, they often start slow. That's true. And when they do, it usually ends up badly. Those are the facts. That is the reality. And the sobering point about the 2023 Timbers is even if they win this weekend in Kansas City, they will still be below that 1.3 point per game threshold, 15 games in. This season is officially in the more likely to be in the litter bin category than to do something that goes on the resume. And so that's why I mean we see you see this a lot from coaches. I mean, we saw it from Phil Neville this weekend. And you see it pretty frequently with coaches of teams that are struggling. That they do sort of bemoan the critics. I think it's basically just because they don't want to bemoan things that are internal, right? Like Gio's not going to get up to the microphone and throw Merritt Paulson under the bus. He's not going to throw Ned Gravovoy under the bus. He's not going to throw his players under the bus. But he's feeling like he's got to throw somebody under the bus. And the critics, however defined, are very throwable. And so, like, I get it. But critics aren't criticizing the Timbers because of some grudge, right? It's not because they're biased against the Timbers or they have some addiction to being angry about the Timbers or anything like that. Critics are criticizing the Timbers because they've been a bad team. That's the truth. Like, and honestly, like, I don't know how you could even argue against that truth with a straight face, right? 1.14 points per game is bad.
It is. And eventually a team just becomes, what they are. Like they are their record, as you said. They are their points per game. They are all the indices of them being, just not a very good team. And, that obviously can turn around. That's something that is possible for them to go on a tear.
Yeah, they're not mathematically excluded from doing something this season.
No, not by any means, particularly given the expanded playoff. But, just making the playoff, as we have noted, ain't shoot. It's not something to be proud of. It's a litter bin season. If you make the playoffs as like a 9 seed or whatever, you win the 8-9 game and then you get blasted by LAFC or Seattle.
Yeah,
in the first game. I mean, that's not something to hang your hat on. As a coach, as a franchise, as players, the big difference I think recently with the Timbers has not been the same as maybe some of the early season issues. The early season, it was like, okay, they have a ton of injuries. Like they are making do with a not very deep roster that is also extremely injured. Now, all of your primary contributors, with the exceptions, obviously, of Eric Williamson and David Ajala, who are out with season-ending injuries, all those guys, for the most part, are healthy, right? And they are capable of playing full 90s in the case of, Jimmy Chara, Dairon Asprilla. They're getting to that point, and the others are already there. Evander is playing every match. He's your best player. Frank Boley, who you brought in to be your, starting striker, he's playing every match. So with that, all of these guys that are your primary contributors are playing, and the struggles and the incompetence on the field is persisting. And that, to me, is the biggest sign that the Timbers are in a really dangerous spot in terms of their season's fortunes, that not only are these guys back and healthy, but they're playing and you're still not getting the results. And that's, that's not on any specific individual necessarily. We're not name dropping people that are to blame for this struggle. It's a collective problem here. It's the roster construction. It's the lack of depth. It's maybe it's the want to aspect of it. That's something that Gio pointed to this week in his comments. He
and I think you can see it on the goal they gave up to Minnesota.
Yeah, he directed less of his criticism toward, critics and more toward, the players for potential buy-in. And that's, that's a pretty heavy thing for a coach to bring up, but it's
also a bit of a boomerang.
Gio's brought it up. Yeah, it's
right.
A boomerang too.
because as much as that coming from a coach may be a criticism of the players, the coach has got to acknowledge that he bears some of that too. It's his job to get his players bought in.
Yeah, and they're in a position now where they play Sporting Kansas City next, right? You gotta get 3 points out of that match, otherwise this conversation gets even more dire, and the buy-in maybe becomes even less possible with certain players who are like, all right, this season's in the can. We're pretty much like in dire straits right now, right? You got to get that, and then after that, the schedule is going to be extremely hard, right? It's if you're not getting 3 points out of games against Minnesota and Austin and Sporting Kansas City, you'd be hard pressed to believe that the Timbers are going to do that at Seattle
or against LAFC,
against LAFC, Dallas, San Jose, NYCFC. These are all games that are on the near horizon, right? And then you've got your little break with Leagues Cup, whatever. That's nice. Maybe that stretch will allow them to, reposition themselves and reset their minds a little bit. But even then, like you're in it now. This is no longer the early season. You're very much in the thick of it. And the Timbers are in a really bad position. They're I think you said 25th in points per game in the league.
It might be tied for 24th. Apologies if that was unduly critical.
Sure, somewhere in that range. But yeah, look, the critics are not critical, as you said, because they have some grudge against the Timbers or the front office or the coaches or whatever. It's the people, ourselves included, who are talking about the Timbers in this critical way. We are not the only people doing this. There are other people who cover MLS who talk and write about this team and other teams. They're doing it because of the results. And at the end of the day, that's the nature of the beast. People are going to be critical. And, I know Gio knows that. He's a guy that was in sports media in addition to obviously being somebody in the sport itself. And he's had relationships with reporters over the years that have been positive, that have been, he gets it. He gets journalism. He understands its role. The question now is, can the team perform on the field to prove those people, those doubters, quote unquote, wrong?
And right? I don't even think it's a matter of proving them wrong, right? Because if the Timbers go on a 5-game winning streak, I will probably say, unless it's some bizarre circumstance of luck, I'll probably say the Timbers have been really good over the course of these 5 games, right? But that doesn't make the fact that they've been really poor for the first 14 games wrong. Right? Like, that doesn't change that. It's not like suddenly all of a sudden you look back at that Minnesota loss and you're like, well, actually, that was great result, great play. Like, that doesn't change that. And so, it's sort of the point of, if you believe on Wednesday what you believe on Monday, regardless of what happens on Tuesday, you're a fool. And I am more than happy to believe something different on Wednesday than I believe today if the Timbers go out on Tuesday and play phenomenally and win a bunch of games. Because that's just living a reality-based life where you're forming your opinions based on actual facts in the world. But, that's kind of the thing. And it's why it touches a little bit of a nerve for me when folks in the club do kind of go after the critics and the haters and the yada, yada, yada. Because, look, the simple fact is, when the team is playing as poorly and getting results as poorly as it is now, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to have people who care and who are critical just because of the facts, or you're just going to have people who don't care. Like the idea that they should be getting a lot of praise for the way they've played to date in this season is just, I mean, it's just fantasy land stuff. That's not going to happen. And so it's a matter of, you know, if they don't like the critics, then the other realistic option is that they just don't have anybody. And I don't think that's favorable. I don't think that's the right choice.
Yeah, no, it's not. I agree with you. But playing, I guess, devil's advocate, for lack of a better term, in that scenario, what do you make of the assertion? It's been brought up by, you know, Gio pretty frequently, but also others in the club, that, you know, they are in better form. They are, you know, rounding the corner in terms of their form. They're just, you know, not necessarily getting the results. Maybe it's a single moment here or there that is shifting the tide, and that in reality, eventually things are going to look better than they do.
I guess I don't disagree that they're playing better than they were in some of those truly abysmal performances early in the year.
Yeah,
like,
I think so too.
It is a fair point, I guess. I'm not sure it's an important point, but it's a fair point that the performance against Minnesota was not as abject as the 0-0 draw against the LA Galaxy, right? Okay. Like I think we can stipulate to that. But you know, I mean, you look at the performances as a whole, the Vancouver performance, really good. The performance away at St. Louis, really good. The last 20 minutes or so against Seattle, really good. And so it is true that they have had games or moments in which they've performed well. Okay. But, and so, you know, I mean, do I think the Timbers are a historically bad team? Are they on the level of an LA Galaxy so far this season? No, they're not. And their place in the standings reflects that. And a team, you would expect a team where the Timbers are in the table to have some moments and some performances in which they play well, and they're all right. And they get some, that's why they have 1.14 points per game. They got some of those. But it's just not nearly enough, and it's not nearly consistently enough. And if you look at the way they put themselves behind the 8 ball, it's just not good enough for them to look good every third game. It's not even close to being good enough to look good every third game. If they look good every third game, I can tell you where they're going to be at the end of the year. They're going to be right around 1.1 or 1.2 points per game, which ain't shoot. And so I think there have been moments in which they've looked better. And you know, the truly abject performances and injuries were certainly a factor in that. I think, frankly, just some lack of preparedness to play was also a factor in that. Those seem to have largely gone by the wayside. Great. But again, when you zoom out and even just look at the performances over this 4-game stretch against this 4-game very accessible stretch of the schedule, I don't think there's that much to love. I mean, they looked better against Austin for periods. But they also sort of failed to put that game away. They looked good, and they did put the game away against Vancouver. And then both the game at Salt Lake and at Minnesota, I don't think there's all that much to love. I don't think they did show much in either of those games that would indicate that they're a, you know, top half of the table team. And that's significant. And yes, tired legs were a factor, but tired legs were a factor for everybody. Salt Lake's legs were at least as tired as the Timbers. Minnesota's legs were at least as tired as the Timbers. They all had the same schedule congestion. They all had we're balancing US Open Cup and MLS and midweek MLS and all that stuff. Right. And so they were on equal footing there. And even then, I mean, were the Timbers markedly better than Minnesota on the weekend? After watching the game, I didn't think so. I think the Timbers had a little bit more of the ball and maybe created some more half chances than Minnesota. But when you talk about the quality of the chances as a whole, probably about pretty even. Game could have been a 0-0 draw, a 1-1 draw, or gone 1-0 either way. And I don't think anybody would have felt that it was manifestly unjust. The game against Salt Lake, 0-0 written all over it. And so if you're asking me whether the underlying performances are suggestive of significantly better results than they've been obtaining. I would say not significantly, because that's sort of just, I think the underlying performances have gone from abject in the first few weeks of the season to mediocre with a little bit of inconsistency. But mediocre with a little bit of inconsistency isn't even close to being able to get done what they need to get done over the course of the season.
Next game for the Timbers is Sunday at noon Pacific against Sporting Kansas City. As we discussed, like a must-win against a Sporting KC team that actually has been in better form lately. So it's not going to be any kind of lay-down game for them to go
until they went and got pumped by a St. Louis team that's been struggling this last weekend. 4-0 at St. Louis, just absolutely crushed. It's an interesting game from SKC's perspective. They've got a few injuries that have cropped up since even last weekend that they may be quite limited. A few guys who are questionable, who would otherwise be regular starters. Alan Polito, who recently come back into the team. A lot of folks have been pointing to that as part of the thing that had improved the Wiz's fortunes. And he's at least a question for this game this weekend. So, but I think it is fair to call this another game that is accessible for the Timbers. These are 3 points that if the Timbers are a team that's got legs, they should feel like they should go and get them. Now, will they? It's a question.
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
Who's to say anymore? The Portland Thorns, they were in a bit of a rut themselves, by their own standards, at least. They much less deep of a rut.
The Thorns had a fever, and there was only one prescription: the Chicago Red Stars.
That's right. The cowbell you are looking for is the Chicago Red Stars, a team that was just abysmal to watch. But regardless of the quality of their opponent, the Thorns came out and got a convincing victory, 4-0. It was 3-0 after like 15 minutes. They were just pouring it on. And it was their get back game. As we talked about last week, like if there was ever a get back game, it was this one. And they got back. They had not won in 3 matches, 2 consecutive 3-3 draws, and then the first loss of the year, 2-1 at Houston. So they needed this badly for their confidence, for the playing with joy, which is something that's, inherent in this group. And they got great performances out of a lot of the players that have been the engine of what they've done in recent weeks. Crystal Dunn had another terrific game with a goal and an assist. Her assist to Moultrie was great. Moultrie herself has become a fixture really in this starting lineup and has been really awesome the last few weeks for the Thorns.
Sam Coffey was really good too.
Sam Coffey was real good. I believe she had 2 assists, if I am remembering correctly.
You're correct.
Yes, she did. She had the assist to Hubley, who scored her second career goal, which was an awesome moment for Kelly.
Nice finish too.
Such a nice finish, and such a funny and interesting personality, Kelly too. Like every time something big happens for her or something big she's involved in, her eyes just pop out and she's just like screaming, and her teammates, just whether they're laughing with her or kind of joking with her, she's just a very jovial presence on this team and an underrated, glue to what makes this Thorns team so good. And the second assist for Sam was on a Kuika header, which was a really nice finish from Kuika. Got banged up later in the game, but she should be fine for this week in San Diego. Sophia Smith didn't score. She was banged up a little bit at the end of the match. Looked like it was some cramping, and it pretty much turned out that was the case for her. It was some cramps in her left leg. She was running a lot and going hard to try and get a goal in a very gettable situation against a Chicago team that could not stop Portland. I will give the Red Stars credit. The back like 20-30 minutes of the match, they were stingy compared to just the horrible waterfall of goals that was just cascading down.
Yeah, I mean the game didn't go like 17-0 as it was on pace to go at one point. But
no, I was talking to Thorns PR people like, hey, like we're probably in like NWSL record for goals scored territory, because it was 3-0 after 15 freaking minutes. And they did not look like they were going to slow down, but they did. And,
I mean, the game was played at a canter basically after it went 3-0. I thought, it was over.
It was completely over. And the performance, I think, had its stretches of maybe things that Mike Norris might not be too happy about in terms of the way that the Thorns played, but none of it is really an indicator of who they are, right? This game Friday against San Diego, I think, is the big test. Yeah, it's a huge, huge game against a really good team with whom the Thorns are, fighting in the table. But yeah, I mean, this is the get back game for the Thorns, and now they are probably a lot more concerned with how they're able to build on that momentum and get a good result in San Diego, which has been kind of a tough place for Portland to play over the last couple of years. But getting 3 points out of that would be a huge statement for them, not only against a Wave team that they probably expect to see come postseason time, but also to the rest of the league. Like, hey, we may be in a bit of a rut by our own standards recently, but we still have by far the best goal differential in the league, by far the most goals in the league, most talented roster. I mean, the list goes on and on. This is a group that needs to regain that belief, as Megan Klingenberg and other veterans on the team have said. And what better way to do it than, getting a big result in San Diego?
Yeah, I think this is the game against the Red Stars was exactly what the Thorns needed. And the Thorns handled it, I think, with the aplomb that they also needed for themselves. I mean, this was, they put the Red Stars to the sword early. And I think basically everything after that third goal was something close to intramurals. And that's, I mean, that's great for the Thorns, right? Because we did, as we talked about last week, they did seem to be in a moment where there seemed to be a bit of a crisis of confidence. And that's exactly the kind of thing that you need to get your swagger back. I thought the Thorns defended well. I think that was, that was frankly my concern in the entire last half of the match, where I was like, please just don't let them give up a couple of goals and kind of get the yips back in that respect. And they didn't. Frankly, I didn't think the Red Stars were ever super close to doing anything like that. Even though it's a Red Stars team that, I mean, they've scored a couple goals, I guess, but I don't know. I was going to try to say something. No, I mean, they dominated the game. I think they went up 3-0, and then there was never any question about whether the Red Stars were going to be able to get back into it. And I think that is exactly what you want from that. So I have no real notes about the performance. I think if the Thorns had wanted to, they could have sent that game to 7 or 8-0 and made it silly. They didn't. That's perfectly fine. But I think this one now, tomorrow evening, Friday evening, in San Diego is just a massive game. Not just because of where they are on the table. They're tied for second. They both are sitting on 15 points, if my memory is serving me correctly. Just one shy of the Timbers and almost half as many games. But I think it's also big in terms of this being among the biggest tests that this Thorns team has faced this year. And if they can take that confidence that they should have regained from that performance against the Red Stars and apply it in San Diego, I think we could be, if they win this game, Thorns are back fully. They are back. And they are back in a place where I think they will be considered certainly among the absolute top favorites for both the Shield and to win the title again. Oh, and that's going to be huge. But the defensive performance is going to be vital, because this is a San Diego team that started a little bit slow, but is picking up some steam. As we know, they have some real attacking pieces. And so if the Thorns are again allowing space in back, if they're letting players get on the ball and run at them and break them down, Alex Morgan and Jaden Shaw can do that. They can really do that. And so that could be a real problem So I think the Thorns are going to need a disciplined performance. I think they're going to need to be able to keep those spaces tight. It's going to be another huge game for Sam Coffey. It's going to be another huge game for the back line and just and sort of the balance in that midfield, which maybe has been a little bit better with Olivia Moultrie in central midfield with Dunn and with Coffey. And so, I think all of that is going to be critical in this one, and they can't let the Red Stars game just be sort of a one-off game against a team that they can just dominate on talent alone. And so that's the task in front of them. I'm really looking forward to it. This is a huge game, and I think it has all the makings of being a pretty fun one too.
Yeah, all the games I feel like recently with San Diego and Portland have been fun. They've been exciting. You think about back to the semifinal game last year, the thrill at the end with Crystal Dunn getting that goal. It's huge, and it's going to be exciting genuinely because both teams want this one. Both teams have something to prove ahead of the World Cup. We aren't too many weeks now away from NWSL players being released to their national teams. I believe it's June 26th that they will depart. So we've got about a month left with the stars of the NWSL, and they want to pick up these points, man. Like Sophia Smith, she wants to get on the board too. Like not only for
I will say I'm 0% concerned about this.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that. She'll be back where she's needs to be,
and she's still productive and effective. Yeah, she's still productive and effective. I mean, she's been their best player still, even in the stretch in which she's not scoring goals. And so, I mean, soccer is a game where you have to just exploit what you can exploit, and sometimes that's setting up goals for other folks, which she's done. Sometimes that's exercising your gravity to open spaces for teammates, which she's done. And the goals are gonna come. She's gonna score goals. But the overall play has been excellent. And so the fact that it hasn't been her name on the top of the score sheet in those entries, I have absolutely zero concern about whatsoever.
Yeah, and Soph is the type of competitor and athlete to get up for games like this, right? She's obviously, aware of where they are in the standings, aware of what it means for the table generally down the road to pick up points in this one. But also, she's going against Naomi Girma, a longtime friend and former teammate at Stanford, who one of the best center backs in the league, if not the best. And it's going to be a battle between those two in a lot of ways.
Also, their matchups have been super fun to watch in the past. They have you don't often get sort of like one-on-one soccer. There have been moments in the games against the Wave in which it's almost felt like one-on-one soccer between Girma and Soph. And it's just been phenomenal to watch. And if you're a fan of the national team, it's just like mind-blowingly exciting to watch too, because you see these two outstanding young players getting after it on an extremely high level. It's good stuff.
Yeah, as already at their young age, two of the best players in the league, and there are some people who would put them like 1 and 2, right, in their rankings of best players in NWSL. That's how much fun that is, and the fact that they're friends, like it's just a really interesting storyline. Like I as a fan of sports generally, I eat stuff like that up. Like
you love the narratives.
I love the narrative. Well, yeah, I'm also a sports writer.
Yeah,
so,
right. Narratives are literally how you put food on the table.
It's literally how I make my money is by narratives, and whether I'm the person that, pursues them or they just exist naturally and all I got to do is write it down. Right. So it's a fun game. I'm looking forward to it, and a big one for the Thorns. The other piece of Thorns news that I definitely want to touch on as we progress in this conversation is Lindsay Horan. According to the manager of Lyon, she will be back with Lyon next year. Olympique Lyonnais, the French team over there that Lindsay Horan is on loan at. That loan expires next month in June. And according to Lyon's manager, she's coming back. Now, what that looks like, we don't quite know yet. I believe the manager hinted in her interview that it was going to be in the form of a loan, but the Thorns also would benefit greatly from obviously selling Lindsay Horan to Lyon or to any other team. for a big chunk of change that they could use to improve the team going forward, and particularly ahead of expansion in the next couple of years, where you're going to lose some of the back end of your roster, like inevitably, and maybe even some of the middle tier players that you just can't protect because there's limitations on that. It's an important and interesting moment. We've been talking about Lindsey Horan's potential return for a while. For a time, I had heard behind the scenes like that it was likely that she might come back. Now she's not, in all likelihood, going to be back if the interview is to be believed, and if there isn't some last minute change of heart here. She'll be back with the French side, Lyon, next year, and the Thorns aren't going to get her back in the middle of the season to try and, bolster their roster even further. Thinking about the situation that the Thorns find themselves in with Horan, what stands out, Chris?
Disappointment. That's what stands out. I hoped Lindsey Horan was going to come back in large part because she's a brilliant soccer player. She fits into probably the most natural hole in the Thorns starting 11. There aren't a lot of holes. As we've discussed, this is a very good team, but if there's one, I think you would say it's in central midfield, and it's a two-way player in central midfield. And Lindsey Horan is that probably more of a 10 than an 8, but she can certainly play as an 8. And she is an honest player in that central midfield, such that I think she would have fit just fine. And she's an excellent soccer player. I mean, look, she is an in-pin starter for one of the best national teams in the world. If you can get a player like that on your game day roster, you want to do it. That's not galaxy brain soccer stuff, right? And having what seemed to be a clear path to bringing her back was an exciting thing for the Thorns. And I think if you looked at that possibility going into the last half of the year after the World Cup and getting ready for the playoffs and all of that, that could have turned a juggernaut even to whatever is even bigger than a juggernaut. And so that looks like it's not going to happen, which is disappointing. Now, I will say NWSL salary cap stuff, if we talk about how much of a black box MLS salary cap stuff can be, NWSL salary cap stuff is like way even worse than that. We have no idea what's going on financially with anybody, including the Thorns. And I think your comments about making sure that they maximize the value of Lindsey Horan and their contractual rights with her is an important one. We will not know. I mean, it's possible that it could be a loan with a significant loan fee. If that's the case, cool. And that allows the Thorns to sort of reinvest that. Cool. If it's a free loan, less cool. If it's a lucrative transfer, cool. So, I mean, the we are likely to have very, very little visibility into that, and I think we have very, very little visibility into what else the Thorns can do to reinforce the team in the summer period. And I'm not sure I mean, they're not in a position like the Timbers are where they need to reinforce the team or they are imminently going to sink. This is a matter of if they can reinforce the team. It's because they are, gearing up to make another run at a title. And do they even need to? I mean, I think you could say that if they go with the roster that they have today, they are still very much a contender to win it. So this isn't an existential kind of thing, as we've seen in some other circumstances. But it's still disappointing because this looked like a fairly clear possibility to really take the team to the next level.
Yeah, and it's a scenario where I don't think it's existential with regard to this season by any means. I think that, as constructed, they are definitely the most talented team in NWSL and capable of winning the championship without a single change to what they have going on right now. The question then becomes, as we, think about the future of this team, as players maybe leave in free agency who are key individuals on this team. You think about players like Crystal Dunn, whose contract is up at the end of this year, as being one of the examples. Then cracks start to form, right? And you want to create some level of insurance to be able to fill those cracks and continue to contend for championships beyond 2023. You racking up these stars is awesome with this current group, but this current group is not going to last forever, right?
Yeah.
Megan Klingenberg is a veteran player. Becky Sauerbrunn is a veteran player. Christine Sinclair is a very veteran player. Like there are a lot of veteran contributors on this team who are not going to be around for very long. And there are also a lot of young players who potentially will see opportunities elsewhere. I mean, it's pretty rare to have this super team type of feeling in soccer. Like you're mostly just like, especially as the NWSL gets bigger, there are more teams, the talent is more spread out. And as more NWSL players go back and forth between Europe, like most of the time in soccer, you're just plugging holes, right? It's very rare that, as you alluded to earlier, that there isn't really one to speak of. If you could point to one, it would be in central midfield. But even then, the 17-year-old is killing it the last couple of weeks. Like Livia Moultrie.
And maybe there's a good argument to be made for letting Liv have that run. I think there probably
is. Yeah, totally. And given Sinclair's in the twilight of her career, it makes sense for somebody like Liv to be the heir to her in that specific position. Obviously, Sink hasn't always been a midfielder. It's changed over the years, but
if you can get an in-pin starter for a top tier national team, you do it every time.
Exactly. And so that's unfortunate that they weren't able to do that. If of course that is how it ends up playing out. It's not official quite yet, but this would be a pretty strong indication that she's not going to be back.
And looking to sort of future years, obviously there are tons of variables, but we would be remiss if we didn't sort of flag a tail that's likely to wag a lot of that dog, which is the ownership situation, and who the owners are, and when that transition happens, and the investment that the new owners are going to make into the soccer side of the Thorns, and all of that stuff. I mean, we don't have answers on that, and those are going to be huge, huge, huge factors in determining who they're signing, whether they're re-signing players, and all that kind of stuff. And I just don't think we know it at this point.
We don't, and there has not been really a lot of buzz around the ownership situation lately. There's
been no buzz.
There's been zero buzz.
Not a lot of buzz. There's been no buzz at all.
Yeah, all the bumblebees are gone from the garden. It's just silence and like the faint sound of the wind going through the garden. But from what I hear from around the league, from around NWSL, is that people are really expecting OL Reign and Chicago to be sold before the Thorns are sold. Just given the buzz around the other two teams and what is most likely to happen with their ownership situations, given the differing complexity of the Thorns situation and cleaving them off from the Timbers and what that might look like, what the, Providence Park situation will look like. Merritt Paulson, of course, has publicly committed to making sure they keep playing at Providence Park. How that happens, who the potential owners are. I mean, the only hint of or I guess there have been a pair of hints, but the only hints that have been, given as potential owners are the group led by Melanie Strong, who is obviously still in pursuit of the team. She's obviously a former Nike executive, has a women-led group that has expressed their interest in and has been part of that process. And then the only other one I could point to is just a wild, shot in the dark rumor is that I saw NFL star Ndamukong Suh walking around in Providence Park the other day. And that doesn't give any remote indication that he has interest in buying the team. His dad actually is a former semi-pro soccer player. It was a weird little nugget. He's got the money to do it. Maybe he's somebody, but again, there's no buzz. The bees are not in the garden. There is nothing, there's nothing pollinating our interest right now.
And I definitely acknowledge all of those things that make a sale of the Thorns complicated. And you're 100% right. There is also one big countervailing factor to those things that would make you think that a sale of the Thorns could be very readily achievable, which is that they're the hottest property in NWSL. like if you're looking at the three clubs that are for sale and you just want to rate which one of them is the is the best to buy, there's not even a discussion. OL Reign have been good on the field, but it's been a bit of a disaster on the business side basically throughout its history. The Red Stars have been a disaster on the business side. They've usually been okay on the field. Now they're a disaster on both sides. The Thorns have been by far the biggest success in NWSL, both on the soccer side and on the business side in the entire league. They are the hottest property in the league, ladies and gentlemen. And
there are literally, there are teams around NWSL who, it's great that these attendance numbers are going up. I'm not saying that, but there are teams around NWSL that are touting like 10 or 12,000 people showing up to their
Gotham
games.
is delighted to have 10,000 tickets sold for their game against the Wave.
Yeah, and the Thorns had double that on Sunday when they played against the Red Stars.
In a regular season game against a bad team.
Yeah, exactly. So that alone is obviously a major indicator of how valuable the product is, and is more to your point that, like, hey, of the three teams that are for sale right now, they are definitely the most valuable.
So I acknowledge the complexities with selling the Thorns. I don't think that those complexities are necessarily fate driving in terms of when a sale could occur, because I think there are countervailing factors that would make a sale of the Thorns more enticing than those other two clubs.
Yeah, the situation with the sale right now is pretty quiet. I would imagine that there'd be more news in the coming months, but again, I have nothing to go off there.
Who knows?
The way that the organization communicates about those things has changed. There are changes in leadership. There are people that are more front facing and speaking with the media than there are others. So it's a big question mark right now. And yeah, it does affect the future in terms of their on-field soccer product. It does impact, their ability to potentially retain players like a Lindsey Horan. We don't know 100% that factored in for her, but it the uncertainty of the situation can factor in for others. And so it's something to think about.
And it has its tentacles into every part of the operation of the club, right? I mean, one of the areas that the Thorns are getting frankly passed by a lot of NWSL teams is their training facility setup. How is that going to relate to a sale? I mean, these are all the things that we just don't know and that are just up in the air because of the instability in the ownership situation. And so I think that makes looking forward beyond 2023 basically impossible. Because, I mean, are the Thorns an attractive place for a player to sign in 2024? Beats me. I don't know. And so, I think in many respects, I've just sort of responded to just all of that uncertainty and that black boxiness of the Thorns' future by appreciating the team that they have now and kind of just letting tomorrow take care of tomorrow. And I think that's kind of the approach that you have to take, because I think there are so many unanswerable questions about the Thorns' medium and long-term future that it's difficult even to discuss.
Thorns face the San Diego Wave, excuse me. I was going to say Saturday, but it's Friday. So San Diego Wave on Friday, that's tomorrow at the time of the recording of this podcast, 7 p.m. That one's on Paramount Plus, so should be a fun one. They return home for a Challenge Cup game on the 31st against Angel City. Would expect a pretty significant amount of rotation for that game because they go on the road to OL Reign the following weekend. I'll be up there covering that game and the Timbers game against Seattle on June 3rd. So that'll be a fun doubleheader in the Emerald City. But otherwise, that wraps it up for us this week on Soccer Made in Portland. Follow us on Twitter, Soccer Made in PDX, at Chris Reifer and at Ryan T. Clark. Rate us if you so choose. Like us, subscribe to us where you get your pods. And thanks again for joining us. We'll be back next week to talk some more football.